Okay. So I need to bring the screen down, don't I? Ooh, microphone. Do. Okay. Oh, alrighty. I am alive and absolutely 100% here. What's that? Like I got hit by a truck. Yeah. And the worse than that is I have a cold too. Like I had a cold and I got sick with this other thing. But then now because I was throwing up so hard, every time I cough, it just like aches in my ribs. So yeah, it's fun. I will survive probably. And if I don't, I'm sure they'll assign someone to take over the class for the last week and mark your finals or something. Maybe I should get it set up beforehand. That's true. Your grief will be overwhelming. No chance of a finals. Okay. That would be a shame. I would miss me. Okay. We're gonna jump in here. We're gonna try to get through as much as possible. I think, I think, I think this will probably be it for like content, like in terms of what's in this slide deck. I'm not exactly sure where that's going to leave us. My suspicion is we might end the semester one class early, which I'm sure you will all be tremendously heartbroken about. You're like, no, take us down to the last possible moment. Um, Being sick and missing that one class because I don't really have time for the last thing I was hoping to bring in, which is fine because getting sick, I also haven't had as much time to prepare it as I wanted to. So future generations of this class will have to enjoy that content, and you will be sadly left without. It's like half done, and I'm like, oh, I just don't know if I have it in me. Plus, the panic of the students has begun, and the wall-to-wall meetings to look over exams has come upon us. Um, so time is a precious commodity. Okay. So what in the H were we talking about on Wednesday of last week? It feels like a long time ago. Okay, so we're talking about kind of Heights views on what's happening to young people and how all of this is connected, right? We went through some of these concepts, yeah, some of these concepts, particularly, I just want to go back a little bit, um, that some of our biases, some of our kind of natural inclinations have been, in a sense, hacked by the tech companies that want to essentially use us as commodities, right? Oh, you can come and take critical media studies with me, and we'll talk about, the audience commodity. It's a fun little unit on advertising, um, from Dallas Smythe. It's a good concept, but we won't do that here, right? We are being turned into commodities, and part of this is, a lot of our psychological vulnerabilities are being exploited by these tech companies. Um, that are slightly diabolical. So, basically, we kind of ended off talking about, what he thinks is going on, discovery versus defend mode, right? The idea that, we have kind of two modes of action, one that's kind of open and one that's kind of closed. Oh, my voice. Yeah, my voice. There we go. One that's kind of closed off to new possibilities. And then we do better when we're in discover mode and less well when we're in defend mode. Okay. And then I guess I'm doing the summary half for myself, so I remember what I was talking about. We talked about how, starting in the 90s, we started to treat kids differently. And especially, according to Height, we started offering way too much protection in person, but kind of assumed that the virtual world was a relatively safe place for our kids. And so we've been uncautious about letting them be online because in theory, right? And this is again sort of what if we think of Twangy from the beginning of the course, right? If you stay home, oh, that's going to happen a lot, isn't it? You stay home, you're not in physical danger. So that's why we see less accidents, less fights, less accidents, less risk-taking behavior, because more of kids' lives is spent on screen. But as a result, we've assumed incorrectly that screen life is safe, right? That you're safe when you're online. Okay. So we've made, and I think these stats, I don't know if these shocked you. They shocked me when I read them. This is not how I parent, which is probably why my children bring home diseases. No, they just do that as a general rule. We've come to see, the physical world, the real world, as more and more unsafe to the point where, again, according to this Pew Research poll, parents have these very restrictive views of their kids, right? 10 before being allowed to play in the front yard alone, 12 before they can be left alone for 1 hour at home, and 14 before they can go alone to a public park. And I know America's scary, but it can't be that scary. Okay. Which leaves us, kind of to here, where we talk about, or we're talking about, we ended off, one of the big changes, right? And what Height says is teenagers need a lot of experience. They need to go fast. Oops. They need to take risks. They need to get into scrapes. They need experiences to help build behavioral patterns, right? They need to have their heart broken. They need to say stupid things in the presence of their peers. So they find out how to be kind of good social agents. Well, you don't want to encourage, your kids to make off-color jokes and say things that are bad. You do learn from those things, right? By taking those risks, you learn things and you build useful behavioral patterns, right? Ask the girl out, get shot down, build good behavioral patterns, build some resilience so that later on you're not too afraid to ask someone to go on a date with you. I'm not referencing back to Donna Freitas, except that of course I am. All right, and safetyism, right? This idea that we need to physically keep our kids safe, and smartphones and other screens block experiences in different ways. Okay, and we're going to talk about our 4 foundational harms caused by technology, right? Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. And then we're going to look at how each of these things affects boys and girls a little bit different. Okay. So, what do we have when we talk about social media? So, what makes social media social? And like I've said, and what Height says, and I think he's right, that social media used to be about connecting people. It has changed fundamentally. Like it still has that aspect, but increasingly, it's tweaked things a little bit so that they're more engagement platforms to keep you kind of hooked into the platform all the time. But what do you have? Okay, for social media, you have user profiles, right? And usually most social media, you use real names, typically, though not always, right? So obviously X is a exception, as is hell. I mean Reddit. Um, Reddit's bad. User-generated content, right? So most of the content on social media platforms, at least in theory, is supposed to be created by the users. It's supposed to allow networking and interactivity, right? So those are our kind of four features of social media. Okay, so what Haidt says is, from the kind of early periods of Facebook, and we can think Facebook kind of got its start and became really popular somewhere around 2004 to 2005, right? That's when people really started jumping onto the platform, and it was the first really big social media platform. Like there were others like MySpace before, but they were kind of nichey. And Facebook really was the first big one. But by 2010, essentially, they had changed all of these platforms to be about attention, right? About keeping your attention for as long as possible. And we can talk about some of the things that they do, right? Like the endless scroll, right? I'm sure you're familiar, right? If you use Twitter or Instagram, or I don't know. I went on Facebook the other day and it's now just a bunch of ads and I don't know what to make of it. No one posts anything. It's like a bunch of comics about these cutesy little aliens that comment on life that I didn't subscribe to and I don't know how they got there. But my Facebook is now that. I went on to look for something on Marketplace, which is the thing I use Facebook for anymore. But you kind of know like Instagram, right? It's meant to be this like endless scroll. So you can just keep scrolling and keep scrolling, or you can pull down from the top and refresh it and get whole new content. It's meant to keep you, essentially engaged for as long as possible. And this Haidt thinks kind of starts in about 2010 and leads to what he calls the great rewiring. And he thinks that actually these technologies have fundamentally sort of rewired the brains of our young people, right? Especially, our kids and teens whose brains were still sort of plastic when these changes were happening. And he thinks that fundamentally what he calls the great rewiring, the great transformation of kind of people's social life, social understanding, and their sort of dependency on these platforms was more or less complete by 2015. So for the last 10 years, we've been living in a completely different world, right? One where these platforms play a larger and larger role. Okay, so harm number one, and this one is pretty easy to understand, right? Because we've been talking about it, I mean, really since the unit on loneliness. Okay, so his point. Well, we think of phones and social media as connecting us. What Haidt says, and this is something that Dean Twenge obviously thinks as well, and they're close collaborators, is that, well, social media, right? Social media is supposed to be all about being social, but actually it's increased social disconnection, right? People feel less socially connected to others than in the past, right? And we see this, right? We've seen this, this chart before. This is our time spent with friends, back in the glory days of 2003. Those were good days when I was in my third year of my undergrad. All things were wonderful and beautiful. Before Gen Z even appeared on the scene to ruin everything. No, I'm kidding. Um, the halcyon days of my youth. Right? Lots of time spent with friends, and it declines. And again, here we're at kind of pre-COVID levels. This is all into COVID, but definitely we've seen a marked decline, right? Of 60 minutes, right? An hour less time spent with friends at least, but actually more than that. So big declines in time spent together. And this point, even when they are together, they are elsewhere. And again, I've talked about it, and it's a book that's worth reading. And I used to teach on it. I don't teach on it anymore because it's getting a little bit old. But it's Turkle's Alone Together. But you could, Alone Together. But you could also, think of like Bowling Alone, and Putnam's classic. people have been sounding these alarm bells for a long time. Um, but especially when we think of this, right? I know Turtle describes this in Alone Together and in Reclaiming Conversation, for kind of two books on the subject, as you get groups of young people together, and there's a kind of constant comparison that's going on between what they're currently doing and what other people they know are doing, right? So she describes like a lot of the college scene when she was doing her research as, um, people at a party texting people at a different party to find out if they're actually at the best party, right? Because it's like, oh, what if this party is actually lame and I'm missing out, right? And this is, obviously what we call the fear of missing out, and all of these fun things. Um, I know in Reclaiming Conversation, when she talks about romance, Turtle describes, a particular interview she had with a young woman. And I may have told you about this in the unit on intimacy. I can't remember anymore. I've taught so many things. I can't remember what I talk about. Where, she had interviewed someone and this person had met, a young man, they got together, they had sex. And then, well, he's in the bathroom afterwards, she's checking Tinder, right? With the kind of excuse of like, well, what if there's something better out there? I just want to see, who else is out there. Not because she hadn't had a good time, or enjoyed the experience, but because it creates this possibility of always something else, right? So that actually kind of disconnects us in fundamental ways. And you kind of see it, right, in terms of the dropping number of trusted adults, right? If we look at, the millennials all the way back here, right? When we talked about the National Study of Youth and Religion, they had more trusted adults and fewer of them, had smaller numbers of trusted adults. Okay. So less time together physically and more time on screens. And yeah, and far less embodied time together, I'll say that. And this is like, I mean, again, I don't always want to use my kids as examples, but pretty much it seems like mostly all my 12-year-old son's friends want to do is hang out together online on Fortnite, right? That is the space they want to be in. They actually would, I think, far rather do that than actually hang out together. And even some of the time before I banned Fortnite, it wasn't just me. My wife also agreed with this decision. It was a co-parenting decision, one I do not regret. We'll talk about that more as we go. Um, even the kind of time they were together, it would be like, hey, can I bring my Switch over to this friend's house? And what are they doing there? They're playing Fortnite, right? So they're together, but they're on screen playing in this kind of digital world, doing less of that kind of embodied, like mildly risky real world play. Getting into scrapes. It's funny because now that I've banned Fortnite and most other online interactive games that my son could play, he went before it snowed. He went scootering with his friends and he fell and his you should see his arm is like ripped up on the side, like he's got road rash. And I'm like, an embodied learning experience for you. Might not be the best thing to say to your child when they've got like a catch on there. I didn't say that. I just thought it. I'm like, well, look, now you've learned not to take that particular risk on your scooter. So, physical lesson learned. You will be safer in the future, or maybe not. Who knows? Okay, so our second harm, right? And again, this is something that if you go back to Jean Twenge's book, iGen, right, that's 2017. She was warning about this as well. If you went back and looked in my, when I used to teach on iGen a little bit more extensively, I actually have a whole section on sleep. If you go back even earlier than that to like the 2008 with Leonard Sachs, he was warning about this, prior to smartphones really becoming popular. I think this is Girls on the Edge. I can never remember the title of the book. Girls, what did I do right there? That's two R's. That one R has an I as part of it. Just go with it. On the Edge, I have to look it up. He was warning about girls staying up all night to craft their profiles on Facebook, which sounds ridiculous. But apparently it was a real thing that was happening. Okay, so teens need to sleep more than adults. I try to communicate this to my teenage daughter, and she's like, I agree. But, when she wants to sleep is between like 3 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, which doesn't really work for me. That's okay. Or it doesn't work for school. But yeah, teens, because, adolescence is a time where the brain is changing really quickly, right? It's going from a child's brain to an adult brain. It's being sort of assaulted by hormones. It's changing really, really, really quickly. Um, they actually need, this is funny, teenagers need almost as much sleep as babies. And babies sleep a lot, right? So 9+ hours a night. However, smartphones, right? Okay, and here, look at my chart, my fun chart. This is from Height's book. Teens who get less than 7 hours of sleep a night, right? So that's 2 full hours less than kind of the optimal, right? So used to be, somewhere around 25% of boys, probably about a third of girls. It's now approaching about half of girls and 40% of boys. Again, that's by kind of the start of COVID. So we're seeing kind of big changes in sleep. Now, the culprit for this is broadly smartphones. Oh, you are guilty of hanging out with your friends and you all scrolling TikTok. Oh, don't worry. Like, you're not at all unique in this, by the way. Um, this is like a generational thing. My daughter invited like 3 of her best friends over, and they're all hanging out in the loft space in our house, and they're giggling. And what are they giggling at? They're all sitting around in a circle staring at their phones and like passing their phones around to each other as they're scrolling different memes on Pinterest. Well, incredibly lame things. It's like, aha, a crocheting meme? I don't know. I don't know what you do on. I still don't understand what Pinterest is. I still don't understand what Pinterest is. What's that? I have 12 shirts. Thank you. I just really like this one. So I wear it alone. I'm kidding. I don't know how many shirts I have. I've never counted because I'm not like that. You haven't seen the red shirt. Um, okay. Aha, I win. So, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just getting off track. Goodbye. Class dismissed. No. So, Height cites 36 correlational studies that find a connection between high social media use and poor sleep, and high social media use and poor mental health outcomes. Okay. Now, again, like these are correlational studies, correlation and causation are obviously different. When you see all of the correlations going in the same direction, right, it points in a pretty strong direction. And the heavier your social media use is, the poorer your sleep duration was. And I mean, it's not really particularly mysterious, right? Um, Twenty talks about this in her book iGen, right? Where's your phone at night, most of you? Right next to your bed? What's that? Radiant, yes, it's or under your pillow, maybe, right? It's charging at your bedside. And the most common excuse for this is it's your alarm clock because no other technology exists that could possibly be used to wake you up, right? Um, I make fun because this is always, I've asked this question for 10 years. It's like, well, why is your phone next to your bed? Well, it's my alarm clock. It's like, if only someone had invented a technology at some point in history. What a brilliant thing that would have been. Um, so it's there. And what is it doing, right? Well, a lot of times for teenagers, it's getting a kind of constant stream of notifications and messages at really, really weird hours. And it's I have problematic sleep patterns. I have chronic insomnia for lots of reasons. But I will be sitting there, in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, eating a snack because I can't sleep, and listening to my daughter's phone go. I'm like, I should go look at that. What in God's name could be coming on her phone at 3 in the morning? And I still don't know because I try to respect her privacy. Like I feel like it. Um, but if it was next to her bed, I almost guarantee, she would be looking at it, trying to figure out what happened, especially if those are notifications from some of her friends. Oh, she had this boy. who was really into her and she was not into him at all. But for some reason, she had become like his emotional support creature. And so he would text her at all hours of the day, being like, I'm depressed and I'm sad. And I would be like, at one point at like 2 in the morning, I was like, she's asleep, go away. But this is the kind of thing, right? This screws up sleep patterns. And if young people are worried that, say, something, some part of their social world is happening on social media without them, they will be attuned to those notifications and listening to them. And that phone, for the most part, is right next to their bed, right? Right there, ready to disrupt their sleep. Or, uh, you know, the second they can't sleep, they're picking it up and they're going on social media to scroll. Okay, so this 2020 study found that greater sleep disturbance and shorter total sleep were associated with greater internalized scores, including depression and externalizing scores, including aggression. Right? So less sleep makes you grumpy. It makes you sad. It makes you grumpy. And this is what we kind of find is happening as these numbers go up. And there's really there's no real ambiguity about these numbers. The teenagers are getting less sleep, and it does seem to be technology driven, right? There's so much more engagement. We could talk about blue light, screwing up your sleep cycle. And because we live so much of our lives on screens, um, we're staring at screens really late. And it messes up our whole sleep pattern. So what do? We take like melatonin to try and fix it. Okay, so I have this thing. It's called a Fitbit. It's on my wrist. It does nothing useful, really, other than measure my heart rate and my stress. And by the way, I can set alarms on it. And it buzzes on my wrist and it wakes me up. My phone lives downstairs at night. So the Fitbit? Yeah, because it's not an Apple Watch, so it doesn't need to be recharged every 16 minutes. Oh, the die is cast. Okay. Um, I also do have an alarm clock. By the way, my alarm clock that I have by my bedside, which I do use, is the same one that I got when I was in junior high, and it still works. So, it's not expensive and it's probably going to last you a while. So, that excuse is not going to fly with me. Where do people with internet friends fall in this concept? Like, how bad is it if you don't have in-person connections with people? Um, it's really bad. So, oh, okay. You've distracted me with your incredible question. Um, okay, I have to answer this question. Hang on. I'm going to do this in a very particular way by writing. Also, I'm worried I might run out of content, so if I can just slow the pace of the class right to a crawl, that'd be excellent for me. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit again about something from Turkle. So this is Sherry Turkle, and this is in a book called Reclaiming Conversation. So she differentiates between two things, right? And I think this matters for the question that you're asking. She talks about two kinds of connections with people: strong ties and weak ties. So, strong ties, generally built, over years in person, and they are relationships of a lot of trust, right? These are the people that, to put it colloquially, they have your back. Right. I mean, so we just put it this way. We have a couple of friends, they don't live too far from us. And the lady had been texting with my wife, and she knew we were really sick, and she's like, "Oh, can I go pick up like groceries for you at the store or anything?" Um, she knew we were sick. She knew we were kind of struggling. She's like, "Hey, what can we do?" Right? They have our back, right? If we ever needed anything, we know they're 5 minutes away. We can call them, they'll come. And we have a lot of people like this in our life. As it turns out, we didn't need anything because we had just done groceries and we weren't hungry anyway for reasons I don't need to explain. So we were fine. Um, So these are strong ties, right? These are the people that have your back. And these are the people you can turn to when you're in trouble. And also, like, if you're going to start like a social movement, these are the kinds of connections you have or you want to have, right? Because, if you get thrown in jail because of protesting, they're going to come bail you out. You can trust them because you know that they're not going to stab you in the back, right? And these are the people that, bring you food. They help you when you're sick, right? They help out. They drive your kids to their activities, right? These are your strong ties. Weak ties are generally pretty shallow, right? They're often, acquaintances. They're often dispersed, right? So they're far away. And I'm gonna write a very technical academic term because when you're in trouble, this is what you get. Sending hugs, right? I don't know if you've ever seen this on social media, right? Like, oh, this person, their kid is sick or their dog died, and it's like, okay, sending hugs. It makes me cringe a little bit. But this is kind of weak ties, right? So if your communities are by and large online, right? You tend to be in the realm of weak ties. Not always, but more often, right? Like if your ties are through like a gaming community or some kind of online, I don't know, you're a furry and you meet all your friends online. I don't know. I have to bring the furry content over 315 for today. Um, Sorry, I did that just for Maggie Cass. That's for her enjoyment and her enjoyment alone. Um, or anyone else who's taken 315 with me, just living on the furry jokes. But right, these are relatively weak ties, right? You're not probably going to get a lot of support. Okay, so back to your question, which I 100% remember. Um, there are less good connections, right? It's harder to build things like mentorship connections with people, build those really strong relationships to have them really to help you develop, you model yourself after them, right? These are much weaker connections, and it's much less likely those people are going to be there for you in the long run when things go kind of sideways. You're definitely not going to get things like network closure, right? When we talk about online relationships. So they're not bad, but they're just less good. That was my very academic way of explaining that. Okay. Great question, though. Okay. Uh, where's my dog? Okay. I will say, in a lot of ways, social media and smartphones have turned us all into Doug the dog, right? Because he gets attracted by motion and he thinks it's a squirrel. I was going to draw a squirrel, but I realized I can't draw. Okay, so this is crazy. The average number of notifications received by a young person's phone per day is nearly 200 or about 11 per hour, right? Heavy users like teen girls, right, that are really invested in social media, the average goes to about one notification per minute, right? One notification per minute, which is a lot. How many notifications have you gotten while you were in class? Zero? Awesome. None? Oh, you're doing well. Okay. Do you just put your phone in do not disturb? Oh, you're just socially isolated online. Awesome. Okay. So you're not a teen girl either. So people can't really okay, so this is a key point. People can't really multitask, right? They shift attention really, really quickly. Anyone who says I'm a great multitasker is technically lying. You're really good at segmenting tasks into small sections. But they've done tests on this, and the more you task switch, the more your performance on each task suffers, even though you often feel like you are doing better. And it's kind of funny. They've done like IQ tests, where they do like basically randomized control trials, and they basically have people do an IQ test, and then they have other people do it with a bunch of distractions. So like they do the pre-test, so to test your IQ, and then they run one person through, no distractions, and then run a person with a bunch of distractions. And it's something like a bunch of distractions on an IQ test is going to run your score down between 10 and 15 points, right? Which is a fair bit in terms of IQ. It actually affects concentration. And according to some studies, heavy smartphone use may worsen ADHD symptoms or potentially create symptoms that look a lot like ADHD, which we will then attempt to remedy by giving you a bunch of stimulants, right? So, attention fragmentation. And this is, it's coming to be a fairly major discourse in some academic circles. Height's been kind of at the leading edge of it, but you're seeing a lot more of it in a kind of informal setting, like comparing, millennials and Gen Z students. And one of the things that people are saying about Gen Z students is they simply can't concentrate, right? Can't give them, and I'm not saying this to kind of cut it down, you can't give them the kinds of readings you gave people a generation or two ago, right? You can't complete them because they're constantly sort of distracted, right? They don't have the attention span. So there is, kind of an argument that's coming that smartphones have basically trashed all of our attention spans, right? Our attention spans used to be relatively long, and now what's the average length of a TikTok? 30 seconds. So our attention spans are getting shorter as the content that we engage with is shorter and shorter. I know I never ask you questions, and I've been all up like asking, and people are like, the professor is speaking to me. I love Doug though. Okay. All right. Zoe. So, addiction. You're all gonna get addicted. Okay, addiction. Now, I'm always a little bit hesitant. Like, I don't love the pathology, right, of things like smartphone and tech and gaming addiction. I've never been a fan of the language. I understand from some people I know who know people who've been working on the next version of DSM, which is DSM 6, that gaming addiction and smartphone addiction are things that are coming into the DSM in major ways. Again, I'm a little leery about the language of addiction, but I'll tell you kind of what is happening in some senses. Okay, so smartphones. Basically how they affect your brain in some ways, according to this kind of model, is they give you a little burst of dopamine as a reward for certain actions, right? So you get a note, and it starts with a kind of, I guess a habituated sequence. So it starts with a trigger, right? You get a notification on your phone, which leads to an action. You check that notification, right? You see what's going on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Leads to a pleasurable event sometimes. And the sometimes here is actually critical. Because what Haidt has said, and actually, we're seeing this increasingly, like when people are talking about gaming addiction, squirrel, right? People are talking about increasing like intermittent reward schedules. That social media and things like, let's say Fortnite, Rocket League, are all built around, I think Genshin Impact, right? A lot of these free-to-play games are built around things like intermittent reward schedules, right? So, what does that mean? Well, you only get a reward sometimes, right? Well, let's take TikTok. Well, what are you talking about? Talk about TikTok as well. It's also built around this kind of thing. Okay, so an intermittent reward schedule, right, is instead of getting a reward every time you do an action, you get a reward sometimes, right? So occasionally you get a reward for doing that action. So what does that kind of look like? The first place this kind of showed up was slot machines, right? You pull the handle, or I guess now they're buttons on a slot. I've never actually played the slot, so I actually don't know. I know, I make myself sound so exciting. I never done marijuana, I don't do anything fun. I've never played slots. I don't gamble. I don't do drugs. I don't really drink either. Most of the alcohol I consume goes into cooking. It's just like the funnest person ever. So I've never actually played this a lot, so I actually don't know this from experience, right? But I've read about it, like a good academic. You push the button and you get the symbols that either match up and give you a prize or they don't. And you keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And eventually you get a payoff, right? Small. So that's an intermittent reward hit, right? It'll go, for a long time without getting another one. And basically, to trigger sort of like a dopamine response, you only need, somewhere around 1 in 27 attempts to get you a reward. That's a kind of minimum. Any more than that, and you actually get more kind of pay. So if you think about like something like TikTok, right? It's going to suggest to you a bunch of videos in, I don't use TikTok either, again, for but it's going to suggest to you a bunch of videos, and some of them you're not going to like, right? So you're just going to scroll by them, scroll by them, scroll by them, until you eventually hit one that you're like, yeah, that was really fun. I really enjoyed that. Dopamine burst. Now, the thing that happens there is actually, and this has been, lots of lab studies have shown this in psychology. I said a nice thing about psychology. Oh no. That actually that intermittent reward schedule creates more dopamine than just getting a reward every single time. Like they've done this with rats, right? Like if the rats push a button and they get a food pellet every single time, eventually they get bored eating and they move on. If they have to push the button like 17 times and the 17th time they get, or randomly they get a food pellet, that anticipation that they know that eventually when they push that button, they're going to get food or some other reward, actually creates a bigger dopamine burst. So all of our social media platforms and gaming platforms like Fortnite, Rocket League, create these intermittent reward schedules, right? So basically, they're going to slowly build it up for a while and then only occasionally give us some kind of payout, right? So like, anyway, I won't describe it if you don't play those games. If you do, I think you'll recognize easily what happens. Okay, so we get pleasurable events sometimes, right? You get a video you really liked, you get, a win in a game, or a prize from the little store that you can access or something like that intermittently. Okay, so the fourth step is investment. And I never realized how kind of insidious this is. You build up an investment in these platforms. A, because you've created a profile, right? So you remember one of our things of social media is they're user generated. You have a user profile, right? So you're invested in this particular platform, right? You've created it, you've created content for it, you're kind of locked into it. So it keeps you coming back because you've invested in it. Now, if you've ever played something like Fortnite or Rocket League, think about this, just in this way, right? You've got, you've been playing for a while and you've got a bunch of skins, right? So you've got skins, you've got you've customized your character, you've got achievements, you've got all of these kinds of things, right? You've got levels, all of those things are part of an investment strategy these companies create to keep you coming back to these games, right? You've customized your soccer car or whatever. Rocket League is fun. I do play Rocket League, but I can easily stop playing it or like a real thing. So I didn't play it for like 8 years, and then I went back to it. I'm still terrible, so there's no investment for me. Right, you've got skins, you've got all of these things, you've customized it, you've invested stuff in it, maybe you've even paid money in, right? This is what we banned our son from Fortnite because it's out of control. And one of the things he said, well, what about all the money I've spent on like battle passes and skins? I'm like, right? But again, that investment. Okay. Super good, as always. All right. So the brain adapts to the dopamine, right? And these things are extremely dopamine inducing. So, and it adapts by down-regulating how much dopamine it's creating, right? So you need increasing amounts of dopamine to feel the same reward. And this is like what people describe when they are talking about drug use, right? It's like, okay, your body starts to get used to the dopamine that it gets from, taking the drug, right? That pleasurable experience. That starts down regulating the amount of dopamine. And then you need more and more of the drug to kind of get you there. And it's the same thing with kind of these tech addictions, right? You get these pleasurable experiences, they generate dopamine, so your body down regulates it. And so basically, ordinary life starts to look really boring, right? Because ordinary life isn't generating as much dopamine as being on a tech platform. Now, the people who design these things, they know. And these things are explicitly designed in this way. Epic Games, right? So the company that makes like Fortnite and Rocket League and a bunch of these other things, they employ PhD psychologists to design their games, right? All of these things, these reward schedules, these investment strategies are all built into the games to make them more engaging, right? So I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's really, really hard. And it's hard enough for adults to fight what is in these things. It's really difficult for kids and for teenagers. So they become very dependent on these platforms at very young ages, and it makes real life seem a little bit boring. So they keep coming back, which further erodes things like their real world relationships, their real world commitments, and all of this kind of stuff, right? They actually pull out of the real world in some cases to spend more time in the digital world because the digital world feels so good, right? They're getting so much reward out of it. And when it's kind of taken away, it's not like, withdrawal in the sense of like an addict going through withdrawal, but there is a sort of period where the brain has to learn how to re-regulate dopamine so that things feel good again. Okay. All right. When we put the foundational harms together. No, I'm not running out of time. Yeah, so when we put these together, right, they explain a lot of why mental health got so much worse when childhood became phone-based, right? Because all of a sudden we, sleeping less social contact, right? And especially things like less trusted adults, less time outside, less risk, more of these kinds of problems with addiction and more attention fragmentation, all of which adds up to sort of big mental health problems. Okay. I will answer these next time. Okay, 2 times speed. Oh God. Some people listen to me at 2 times speed, and I feel like that would be very bad. Okay, well, we'll talk about next time why social media harms girls more than boys, and I'll answer these questions. Yeah, there's so many other things that boys are doing that are less wholesome. Yeah, and porn, a lot of porn. You know the one that's coming down the pipe, and I've noticed all of a sudden, like the app stores are flooded with it, is chatbots. Like AI, like but instead it's like pretending to be a person, so you can like have conversations back and forth with them. A lot of it is like almost like you were chatting with a real person.
It's actually insane
Yeah,
how like human this sounds.
yeah, like
Crazy.
it's like if you wanted to chat with your favorite anime character, it'll like pretend to be your favorite anime character. Right? My son was trying to do this and I had to block it. I was like, no, we're not doing this. But a lot of it is like very obviously like quasi pornographic, right? It's like aimed at men, and a lot of it is like, okay, a monthly subscription fee to use this chat thing.
No, this is my friends. She's my girlfriend.
Well, there's real fears that people are like falling in love with these chat bots. But the other thing is, of course, these chatbots, they just tell you what you want to hear, right? Like you can very easily suggest them into certain conversational paths, right? So they're going to tell you in 5 minutes that they love you and you're awesome.
That you're not wrong for thinking this. this
Oh,
way.
true.
This.
Exactly, right? And so, whereas like human beings are difficult and messy and kind of a pain in the ass, you know, getting along with, you know, say a real girl is a lot harder than a chat girl that's just going to tell you everything you want to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
Look at the bestest. Make America great.
It's like the new my girlfriend. My girlfriend.
My AI girlfriend. You as well.